Hello, everyone. I'm Jihon Kim. It's a great pleasure to be you all today and share some stories from Busan, the second largest city in Korea, and the host city for the next World Heritage Committee to be held July 2026. Well, I'm not sure whether you know much about Korean War. Well, compared to Vietnamese War, it's relatively unknown or forgotten, I guess. But it was first international conflict after the Cold War. It broke out in 1950, and of course, the casualty was so huge. So it took lives of more than 400 million people, and then it's 8 million people were forced to leave their homes, and also 10% of them actually sought refuge in the city of Busan. So that's why Busan became, world capital during the Korean War. So I'm going to talk about why Busan's story is so meaningful as a reference for the people who are working in the city heritage issues. Busan was the wartime capital. It was the longest wartime capital during the Korean War. So when I see the duration of Busan as a war capital, it is more than like 1,000 days. There are several, components related to Korean War in Busan still existing, 5 buildings and 4 sites. So it includes some, government facilities and refugee camp, and also, UN or US related, places. So these are several, photos of those sites. Well, you may wonder where Busan is. There's a small, map of the Korean Peninsula. In the very southern part of the Korean Peninsula, there is Busan. And Korean government decided to recently this wartime capital Busan as World Heritage, which means we're gonna submit the nomination file in 2028 for the evaluation in 2029. And there are two criteria to satisfy wartime capital Busan as a World Heritage site. So the first criteria is criteria number 3, which related to bearing a unique or exceptional testimony to cultural tradition, which is living or which has disappeared. So for now, I think it's disappeared for Busan case. So we described Busan site as having the meeting this criteria number 3, stating that Korean War was the first international war during the Cold War, involving the United Nations Command composed of 60 countries. And wartime capital Busan is the exceptional testimony to the various historical moments and aspects as a result of the war. So it's quite neutral for now, right? And the other criteria is criterion 6, which is related to intangible value of the site. So wartime capital Busan is directly and evidently associated with the history and life of more than 1 million refugees of the First International War during the Cold War. These two criteria was the main ground for the Korean government and actually the local government of Busan to pursue the World Heritage nomination. I told you there are several components consisting this nomination. So first components are first modern heritage site that South Korea prepares for the World Heritage nomination. The characteristic of these sites are really unique because the Korean government nominated the cultural heritage sites in particular for natural heritage as well. So far, 17 sites, and all of them were national heritage sites before the nomination, which means that it was already there, and the people consider that those sites as heritage sites. However, those modern sites from Busan were not naturally designated sites, which means that we needed something, to make people think that these are the heritage sites. Because, for the people in Busan, those port area or the villages where they are living, it's just, daily life places, not a heritage site. So we need, the process of heritagization, the process of heritage making. 5 out of 9 components were neither national or city designated or registered heritage sites. So we started the heritage legislation as the first process of this heritagization. However, when we see this heritagization process, there are several actors who led the entire process. And this is the first point that I wanted to share with you. Here we have a lot of local experts now in India. Likewise, there are many local experts in Busan who valued this modern heritage sites as a really valuable cultural heritage. So it was actually very local expert-driven project from the beginning. So it was not the community, but the local experts that initiate the process of heritization. I mean, local experts, they had many ideas how to revive the areas which was affected by Korean War or not, and still marginalized from the city development. And then, those local experts conducted research on wartime history in Busan and identified several important sites related to the war, and also figured out their value or potential World Heritage sites. Those local experts thought that, okay, this means a lot. Maybe, local government can do something to protect it. Because as I mentioned earlier, it was not registered or designated site. So it needed protection under the pressure of urban development. Let's say, for example, those refugee villages, it was marginalized from the development. You can see in the photo, those houses are really small and outdated. And you can see there's an apartment component very far, and those village people, were dreaming that maybe we can rebuild our houses like that way after demolishing all small houses constructed during the wartime. But experts thought that those houses built during the Korean War is very meaningful in that it is a testimony of wartime. So they started to work with local government to persuade local community to figure out what is the value of their houses and also their environment where they're living as well. So local government accepted the proposal of local experts to protect those sites as a heritage site. Anyway, experts played a lot of important roles to connect between the local government and the local community to figure out the value of the heritage sites. But at the same time, they were supporting the voluntary activities of the local community. And of course, the local government supported them financially. So they provide some small budget so that the local community can organize some community festivals to invite tourists to come to visit, to figure out what's going on the site and why this site is very meaningful like that. These kind of activities were motivated by some expectation for the development. There was some big desire of the local community. They thought that, okay, maybe we can do something more once our village got designated as cultural heritage site. They managed to protect their houses under the pressure of development. So far, quite beautiful stories, right? However, there was another village which were anti-heritage protection, another way, pro-construction, if I put it in a very simple way. There's a port area where during the wartime, there's a lot of soldiers arrived here and a lot of refugees. It is very meaningful place. But this area was also a bit marginalized from the development. The residents near this port were against the legislation of this port as a heritage site. So there was a big petition, and the city government of Busan had a really big agony how to deal with it. So there was a lot of, a series of discussion, like this small room, like residents representative came and local government representative came as well, and also local experts came to persuade the local communities, saying that you misunderstood what we are doing. We are doing for your further development. We are not blocking the development. The development direction is a bit different, but the goal is good. Yeah, the same. So that's how those local experts persuade the local community and also together with the local government. Those legislation process were facilitated by the local acts because in Korea there's a World Heritage Special Act enacted in 2021. It really emphasized the importance of the local community's involvement in the preparation of World Heritage nomination. So that's why the local government people try to follow the older process well. I think many countries are quite similar right now, but more than 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we also had very much central government-led World Heritage nominations without participation of the local community. But after this act on World Heritage in 2021, the local or central government had to follow the process of the local consultation. So that's why they did a lot of efforts to persuade the local community. Finally, after the series of persuasion, this port area became the last city registered heritage site. So it was only last year. It was very recent case. So I'd like to share some lessons. Regarding the process aspect, I told you that it was initiated by the local experts. I think this means a lot. I mean, to identify the local sites and their cultural value is very important. So I think this is very unique. And also, thanks to the local experts' recommendations, Busan metropolitan government and local government respected it. So that is another very important point. Thanks to those partnerships between the experts and government, local community joined this process for the nomination. Although I mentioned that it was very meaningful in that local experts led the process, but in other words, it was not really bottom-up prioritization. It was kind of top-down. Maybe some people criticize this Busan nomination as like elite-led nomination. Well, it could be criticized like that way. So that criticism can be connected to my second point about narrative aspect. Since the experts wanted to emphasize the good cultural heritage value of the sites a lot, there were some missing narratives. I can say that it was motivated by beautiful stories about the Korean War. Refugees forced to come to Busan because of war. And in the nomination preparation form, there's a saying that Busan people try to help refugees by sharing food and water and blah, blah, like that way. But according to other researches, it was true that there was a tension between those two groups and that they didn't like each other. So sharing something is quite difficult, right? But experts wanted to tell all the beautiful part of the wartime history. So they depicted this part only. Maybe that's why people criticize this nomination as elite-led nomination. But the local communities started to think about their past as a beautiful past. I mean, people, forget some hardships easily, right? It was really hard at that time, but after several decades, people believe everything was good. That kind of, I don't want to say forced narrative, but imagine or creative narrative by experts or adopted by local communities. So local communities also started to think that we were really peaceful during the wartime. So this creation of the imagined narrative actually have a negative impact to the local community because it weakens the linkage between the heritage and local community because it was imagined, right? It was not really real stories. So it can harm the linkage. So that is my point. So if the linkage is weak, then local communities do not have strong ownership over the heritage sites. So that means it became very fragile under the pressure from the development. So that is some dark story. So here's some conclusion and suggestions. Towards more inclusive and balanced heritization to ensure sustainable protection of heritage, heritizations should be led by different entities as a complementary process and to facilitate each other and therefore enforces the entire process of heritization. I mean, if elite-led heritization is only there, then local communities just follow, then they lose the ownership. So local communities should have ownership so that they can protect the heritage sites from the development pressure. In particular, this kind of modern heritage in big cities. So I believe the local experts need to conduct more researches to pay more attention to various local memories. And of course, that kind of researches can be supported by the local governments. But local governments maybe doesn't want to show this kind of dark stories. So local authorities also need to be open-minded to promote the value of heritage sites as they are with the participation of the local communities. So Busan City has to amend the relative legislation to involve local communities' representative to the decision-making process. I mean, with government aspects speaking, there should be some decrees or order under the local government to ensure the local communities' participation. And maybe lastly, the local communities need to appreciate the heritage value to be its guardians against urban development pressure. They should believe in the value of heritage protection for the sustainable development. I mean, if they value only the massive construction as a development goal, they cannot protect the heritage sites at all at the end, right? They just want to demolish them for the economic gain in the short term. So they are the ones who need to appreciate the heritage value of the sites. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.